Perimenopausal Athletes and Beyond, a masterclass series bringing together experts in mindset, nutrition, training, recovery, thinking about the whole athlete. And today we have the incredible, the beautiful Melanie McQuaid. Welcome, Melanie.
Hi, so happy to be here and thank you for inviting me.
Well, what an honor that we have you and to share your expertise in so many ways. So let me just give people a little bit of a taste of who you are, and they're going to get to know you a lot better through this interview. But first of all, so you are currently a professional athlete, and you've been doing this for over 20 years now.
Different sports, but yeah, that long.
4 different sports. So you were a mountain bike endurance, mountain bike cross country, mountain bike short track, road cycling, road racing, Olympic distance, sprint distance, half Ironman, off-road Xterra, cross triathlon. So, each of those actually is a different sport. Like you say 4 sports, but every single one of those sports is actually quite different.
I think they fall under an umbrella. Like cross country mountain biking was a thing, and then when I switched to road, that was really a different thing. And then when I switched to Xterra, I was really focused on Xterra, but doing I did some I2 racing and I did some sprints and whatever. And then so you switch to Ironman, and that's kind of its own thing as well. So, but yeah, I liked. I think my whole career, I really enjoyed the challenge and. I think I just wanted to see what level of mastery I could get in endurance. And so I wasn't really that particular about one particular thing. It's just when one got my attention, I was like, oh, I wonder how I can do this. And so off I went. So, and so now I really appreciate the varied perspective I have on training. Because these are all different asks in all these different sports, and I think it really is it's beneficial now at this point in my career.
Well, and I think what's really fascinating, and we're going to get back to your bio in a second, but what I think is fascinating about what you have done is a lot of the sports that you've chosen are very technical. They're very skill based, and in all mountain biking, extremely technical at the level in which you're racing at, and then criterium racing, understanding strategy and the tactics, in addition to feeling comfortable riding and really fast around other people. And the swim is a whole other piece of technical, very different from a bike. Obviously, there's a lot of feel to that water. So is it as much that in learning how you have you just love that technical aspect of being in your body as well?
Well, I think what I appreciate a lot about, if you take crit racing or short track racing, and then, if you extend it to Xterra, it's a race where it's you against the course and you against the dynamics. And so I think that when I was in events like that, it really helped to narrow my focus. And so I would really easily get in that sort of instinctual flow state of trying to anticipate what's going to happen next and place myself in a certain way. And I think that that's part of the reason why I really excelled at those types. When I was a mountain biker, I was really good at short track, less good at some of the longer cross country races. And I think it was because I just naturally was better at focusing in those events and having that instantaneous sort of reaction was that was a strength of mine. Whereas the long-term focus and just waiting and being patient, especially when I was younger, definitely wasn't as strong a strength. And so even when I went to Ironman and I went back and I raced one of the I2 World Championships for cross triathlon, it was amazing to me how fast the race went by and how I didn't even really have to think about focusing, because the event itself demands that of you, and because that's sort of just a natural thing that I'm lucky to have, it just comes out. And so I think that just as some people are genetically disposed to certain events, I think that was sort of a skill that I just came to the sport with, and it just ended up being a a weapon I could use, is that in events that required that kind of focus and anticipation, I was pretty good at that.
I so have something that I need to come back to about that. You said instinctual flow, and I want to tap into that. But I just want to say one other thing about you before we go back there. I want everybody to know that I want everybody to know, because they're going to look at you and they're going to be like, oh yeah, but she's like early, late 30s or something. And I want people to know what you're doing at the age that you're doing it and at the position you're doing it. So will you share your age and where you're
Oh yeah.
at stage?
Oh yeah. Like I'm 40. I'm gonna turn 49 this year. Oh my god. I can't, it's like so weird. But yeah, I'm turning 49 this year.
So
So I'm not in my 30s by
not
any
in your 30s anymore, ladies. And like
no.
this is how it is. Now, there was one other thing that you have in your bio, and it's these words. It's that you love being relentless, pushing my limits, and defying expectation. And this has led you to your 5 world titles and earning your spot to 23 world championship events in 5 different sport disciplines. Now, what I want to come back to is being relentless, pushing my limits, and defying expectation, and tying that back to an athlete in perimenopause and beyond, because I just want to like pause there and go, this is us, right? Like this is an elite athlete, and this is also us. We're pushing all of our limits. We're defying the expectation of what has always been, and what we can do now is really like, it's limitless. And yeah, we need to be relentless in our pursuit of our health and of our what we be. So we've got the perfect expert here. That's what I want to say. I love it. So you said instinctual flow. And this is something, when we talk about flow and you read the literature in this idea, flow is, it's the eye of the hurricane. It's becoming completely present. You said in your words that it was amazing how quick it went by. All of a sudden, like you just reacted. You had the innate ability to react in a way that enabled you to get through the course and take on the strategy. And what I want to know is, how has this being athlete helped you become the coach that you are? Because you are also a coach. Your other identity, and a really prominent identity for you, is coach now. So how has those two played on each other, and how do you take that into your coaching now?
I think by and large for female coaches, there's always been this expectation that you have to have done in order to be able to teach it. And I don't know that that's valid. Like, I know that there's lots of male coaches that reach like the top of the coaching pyramid by doing like being couch potatoes, right? Like there's just not the same expectation for men. But I do think that like for those men and for male coaches, there's a level of experiential learning that you just miss if you haven't actually lived and done what you're trying to teach. So in as much as like for sure I believe that there's going to be great female coaches that maybe were not athletes at all themselves. Like it's not that I don't think it's possible to be excellent as a coach without doing. I think that when you have that much more empathy and appreciation, and just when you experience something, it's imprinted on your memory. Like you can go back to those experiences and really relate to an athlete that's going through the same thing. And coaching is about like looking at a person and finding that common ground to reach them where they're at. And I think sharing stories and experiences and discussing what it was like for you, and then like hearing what it's like for them, is a real bonding experience that makes a coach that much more effective. So I just appreciate having had those opportunities, and then it does lend a level of trust from athletes, because they know that like generally I have experience at this level of performance, and I know how to get them there, even if their journey is like way different than mine, because like everybody comes to this from a different place, and certainly like what I did isn't what somebody else is going to do, but at least you understand the assignment when you've
Yeah.
completed it.
Absolutely. How have other, like, so have you had a number? I actually don't know the coaches that you've trained with. How have they informed your own, and what have you gotten from them, and to, help you form your own coaching philosophy?
Yeah, I've had some really great coach experiences in the past. Like early on in my Xterra career, I got to work with Cliff English for a while,
Mhm.
and I could see what was happening in terms of like Sam McGlone's rise in the sport, and so I could see like the commitment and how they interacted with one another. And I actually I trained with them for a certain period of time, and I think that was really beneficial. And Cliff was just a great resource for me, like offering feedback on how to bring my running in. But I have to it's all a cautionary tale, because the world of coaching is a lot different now than it was when I was coming up in Xterra. It was like 2000, which is a million years ago. And at that time there was Ironman, and then there was like some like draft legal triathlon, but Xterra was this weird thing, and triathlon coaches didn't know anything about mountain biking. Mountain bike coaches didn't know anything about triathlon. And when my first year, I tried to be in the National Triathlon Center, and it was a disaster. Like, I was awful. I went from like second at Worlds to a DNF. So it was just not, it wasn't a good thing. So I was willing to change everything and dive into this program, but it really didn't work. And I knew it wasn't working. Like, I think that, you don't come out of a science program and have a logbook that's like detailed with everything you've done every day since the day you picked up a bike, and then go into a program and think, oh, well, maybe it's me. Like at a certain point, you're like, something isn't working here. And so basically what I did is I just started buying books. I bought every book and I read them cover to cover. So I think the one that was most impactful for me was Joe Friel's book, which like gave me some idea as to what the methodology of triathlon training was. And I had already a really good handle on how to train for cycling, because I worked with Hushang Amiri for a long time. And still to this day, like every once in a while, I'll spam him with some question about time trialing or whatever, because he's just like, he's brilliant and he's just a wonderful man. And he just taught me a lot about, mostly just being patient. And I think the other thing that he taught me is that you just have to be confident in what you're doing. And so he's like, whether you think it's going to work or you don't think it's going to work, you're going to be right. And so he was actually the coach that gave me the most confidence that I'd be able to coach myself. So if we look at my career, like the most impactful coaches were Hushang when I was mountain biking, and he helped me with my mountain biking for a long time while I was coaching myself for triathlon. And then I worked with Cliff for a year or two, and then he was too busy with other athletes, and his program moved, and so I was like in Victoria, figuring my own thing out for a really long time. But the thing is I've always been really curious, and like just wanting to know what everyone else is doing. So I was in the Tri Center for a long time and just paying attention to like what Lance Watson would do for that group, and then what Joel Filial was doing with that group, knowing that what was required for, Olympic distance triathlon and Xterra were different, but the same, and so just paying attention and listening. And then I also had a chance to be there while Pat Kelly was in there. And so again, I'm just watching.
Yeah.
And then like later on, I wanted to know about development, because I was starting to think about being a coach. And so I asked Kelly Guest if I could just hang around with his juniors. And I was like this 40-year-old woman with these teenagers. And it was a way for me to get mentorship, right? Is just to basically see what is the junior program. And so that was another coach that taught me a lot about development. And then fast forwarding to today, I felt like when I looked at my overall program, the biggest weakness I had was like experience with elite level running. And so I've spent the last 3 years working with Altus and Dan Paff. Like basically, I was like, what are the best in the world doing? And frankly, if you want to know anything about running, like Dan and Stu are the guys. And so That was my, like, pretty much the renaissance of my, coaching. Like, I think my mentorship with Dan has probably been one of the most impactful things that I've done. And not just from a running perspective, but also like helping me to get up to speed with strength and conditioning and, communication is just amazing. So, I mean, those are just some names. Obviously, like, I've always been like,
Yeah.
let's talk about whatever with whoever. And I just respect that there's lots of different ideas and approaches. And if they're working, like, you can't question that.
This is okay. So I think that that's the point, right? Like, so you have a couple things: patience, confidence in what you're doing, and stick it out a little bit, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously if it's not working, like you had experience, then you need to shift out of that too. But, and then the other thing that I love that you said is that you really watched and you really took in all you possibly could. And I think that that's a really interesting thing for us as athletes in perimenopause and beyond, because we're in a science now that, like, there is not, we like to think, okay, finally we're getting science on female athletes. And yeah, and the, N is 15 and the N is like 30, and it isn't representative of huge population. And so we hardly can, we can see general trends, but it's still going to be really tough.
Well, and I think, like, just as like it's almost impossible to get elite level data on elite level athletes, because elite, like, what is elite, number one? Like, how good do they have to be to qualify for that, like, label? There was a study just on that. And then, so there's very little actual research on truly outlying talent. And then if you look at, perimenopausal and menopausal women, I think the generation that I'm in is going to be different than the generation before us, because I think the level of activity and knowledge on training and stuff like that is different. And I think that it's going to affect, like, the experience with aging. I just believe, because, if you extrapolate the health benefits of exercise on, cancer and diabetes or whatever, it's going to have it. I think people's experience with all of these things is going to be different depending on activity level. And so I just think that you're going to have to look at every perimenopausal woman as N equals 1, because I don't think these studies, you compare one person's experience to another, and they can be night and day. So, everybody's going to have their own. There's not going to be good blanket information for anybody.
So putting those two questions together then is, when you get an athlete, or as athletes are considering, well, how do I train? Like, okay, so this is great. Basically, I'm on my own. Like, how do we start? We know we have to have patience. We want to take a look around and see what people are doing. We want to try a methodology and stick with it. What would you say and you are also an N equals 1? How do you support your athletes, or how is it that we start moving forward in this is, you need to lift heavy, we need to do intensity. How do we fit it in? Give us some ideas on how you work with your athletes on that.
Okay, so you have a few sort of common recommendations that I think need sort of clarification.
Yeah.
So lifting heavy. What is heavy?
Right?
Like, so if you're a person who started lifting weights in high school, you learned how to Olympic lift, you have really great technique, you know how to squat, hinge, push, pull with awesome technique.
Yeah.
Your training age as a weightlifter is advanced, right? Yeah. But if you're your standard 50-year-old woman right now who wasn't in school sports, hasn't been in the gym ever in her life, basically did Jane Fonda's her whole life, can't squat at all, been running and have a variety of running injuries, no dorsiflexion in her ankles, she can't squat, she's never been taught how to hinge, weak overhead, extension, her training age is like 0. So heavy for her is her body.
Yeah.
And so I think that statement, lift heavy, is you got to be careful with that, because just as like I'm not going to send somebody off the couch to run a marathon, I'm certainly not going to send somebody off the couch into the weight room to grab the like squat bar and basically like wreck her body like the first day she's in the gym. So
Right.
heavy is relative. And I think weightlifting in particular is extremely technical. Like people way overlook, like if you are not squatting correctly or hinging correctly, you aren't using the right muscles anyways. So you're not like doing anything good for yourself lifting heavy when you can't lift. Period.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
So if we like back that up even a little bit, we look at like, what is the point of like the weightlifting? And it's to move athletically, right? Like we want to simplify these movements and then add weight to them to like create a simplified exercise to like make the body stronger. If you rewind it even more, you need to look at, okay, why wouldn't my body be moving athletically? And so I think that's one thing that a lot of triathletes in particular, even cyclists, kind of overlook. Cyclists can kind of get away with it because cycling is so not technical, right? Unless you're mountain biking, right? Like it's just pedaling a bike. Like you can kind of like your body is like a super compensator, like until your back blows out because you can't support your pelvis. Like basically you can get away with riding for a long time without injury. But with triathlon, it's going to hit you like early, right? There's a lot of impact with triathlon.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's why I like keep yammering on about mobility all the time. And it's because like if your body can't like move limbs around joints correctly, you're just going to get injured. And so I think that instead of like the recommendation be lifting heavy, I would say like, let's start moving athletically. Like let's start working on joint function like immediately, because particularly for athletes that are perimenopausal or menopausal, we're looking at this as like, hey, we would like to age gracefully and we would like to add longevity to our bodies because we don't have a choice. Like this is the body we're in right now. And I think mobility at the core of it, like your ability to move a joint in a healthy way, have a good active range of motion through those joints, is what protects you from injury, is what allows you to like strengthen muscles correctly, and is what's going to allow you to move quickly. And so like, I think it shouldn't be lift heavy things. It should be, let's move athletically and like start looking at like, how do we actually do that? Because in my experience, that's what's missing for a lot of people. Like they can swim, bike, and run, but you can see it. You can just see the high level compensators out there, you know, gutting it out, just on the verge of injury at all times.
That's so brilliant. I love that. Thank you. I really do. I think it's interesting because it's, you know, what is the messaging that we're getting and what is it that we're sharing? And I think that you have a cautionary tale here that we need to hear. And while it's, you know, it is relative, it is something, I love your, what's the point? Like, because it's what I call my Thursday session every Facebook. I go, what's the point? Right? It truly is.
Well, like I can get people doing an exercise I call the duck walk, right? I ask them to do a duck walk, and I can get their heart rates like I can get them like exhausted in about 30 seconds, because just supporting your body at this like extreme range of motion, like really down low, like try it, like try walking like a duck.
Oh, I can imagine.
20 seconds. Anybody go out there and try and like look at yourself in the mirror. You're probably going to see that you're not anywhere near as low as a duck really is. And yet that exercise is like extraordinarily difficult, right? So these movements can be like just as challenging as trying to like lift some weight, and like, you know, potentially that's where you need to start.
Yeah, I love it. All right. That's the basis. So, you know, you got through the lift heavy part there. Now let's talk about intensity and putting it together. So the listeners, the viewers of this particular series is really trying to figure out, how do I put this together? Like, okay, I'm trying to do everything right. I'm trying to eat right. I'm trying to train right. I'm trying to recover more. I keep on hearing recover more. what is this balance we're actually trying to look at? And I know you'll say, well, what are the goals? But I wonder if you can just lead me in some of the things that you think are really important when we're thinking about health, when we're thinking about showing up to start lines, and how do we, patience was one of the things that you keep on coming into. And is that how you start with athletes, is saying, okay, well, let's see where you really want to go?
Yeah, I think you have to start with like a healthy dose of self-awareness, like understanding where you are now, because usually when I sit down with someone, I say, okay, this is where we are now, and this is where we can get in this period of time, and this is like how long it's going to take to get here. And so when we talk about goals, they're always on a timeline, right? You have to have a goal that's achievable within a certain amount of time. And then, like, the way I describe it is you have to do the training to do the training to do the training. Like, basically, you train from here so that you can get there. And then when you're there, you do the next thing, get somewhere else. Now, the issue with that, when you're training for health and longevity, is it's accountability, right? Like, it's always like assigning importance to these things, because if you don't have something that helps keep you accountable to that work, it's really easy to replace it with some other like thing. Like, we're always putting out fires and like allocating time to certain things. So unless you're like appropriately like scared or excited about something that's coming, it's really hard to keep the priority there or protect that time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's like, you either need to have a race that's scary enough that is going to frighten you into doing the work, or you need a challenge, right? And I coach people who don't do races anymore. Like, they might have raced before, and
Mm-hmm.
their commitment to training like varies, right? Because sometimes work will be like exciting and motivating, and so they'll just lean really hard into their work life for a while, and then they like come out the end of that and they're like, man, I hate being unfit, and like my friends are dropping me, and this is not what I want, right?
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, let's go back to training. But without a race, like, it's hard to prioritize that and identify as an athlete, because athletes find it really easy to protect this time and be selfish about it. Whereas, like, when we don't identify as athletes anymore, we're a lot more like, we'll let go of those sessions a little bit easier. And that's where, having a challenge helps, where it's like, every day I have to do this. And then, so every single day you're accountable to that time.
Oh, Mel, that is so perfect. Okay, so why in the world did I call it perimenopausal athletes and beyond? When people say, yeah, but Tennille, I'm not an athlete anymore, I don't identify it as an athlete, it's because the athlete is the mindset of being intentional and targeted.
Well, and I think this is a good thing for us to talk about, because I think if you train, you are an athlete. I don't think you have to race to be an athlete, but I think that when there's not a race and they're not a racing athlete, they let their athlete identity kind of like go behind other things. I almost feel like sometimes, especially like, so I'm talking more about people who have raced in the past and now don't race anymore, and they're almost like repentant about their racing self, because they're like, man, I was so selfish and all I did was this and I feel bad, and and so they're trying to be like accommodating. But I think that like, once you've raced, that doesn't go away, right? Like, that person is still inside you, and that desire to feel that way in your body is always going to be there. And certainly you don't have to like dedicate the amount of time that you did when you were like doing an Ironman or whatever. But I think that if part of you is feeling really competent physically, then you have to feed that part of you. Like, you have to maintain that physical competence in order to feel yourself. And so I don't think you have to apologize about that. And I think that you can say, hey, like, if we just talk about mental health, like, if you want to feel good in your body and this is what makes you feel good, then that's your mental health time, and it should be prioritized. It's not being selfish. It's being like, it's like I said, living your rad life. This is what makes you feel good. Like, you don't have to apologize for that. And then, yeah. And then I think finding ways to like keep that time meaningful, whether it's a challenge or like, okay, every day at this time I do this, and then habitual, like whatever it takes to like maintain that accountability.
So for those athletes that aren't training for races anymore, it is you mentioned habitual, and I know a lot of people are trying to figure out where they are in this athletic journey for themselves. A lot of athletes in the post menopause, they're not the priorities have shifted again. They actually don't care. Like a lot of people, I'm not saying all, absolutely not all, but a lot of people, like, I don't care about the racing, just as you've talked about. Do you shift? I know some people are interested in understanding, you know, a 7-day training week versus a 10-day training week. And how does this shift from training for certain goals and prioritizing it shift from, in a training perspective, of like 7 days to 10 days to blocks to, you know, an annual training plan to however you want to take this on? Is there enough of a question in there for you?
Yeah, I think, okay, so if we talk about blocks and like organizing training, when we do something like that, it's because we're trying to be really intentional about where we place intensity, right? So if you want to be able to do a certain amount of VO2 max work in conjunction with like appropriate threshold work, and you want to maintain the frequency of that, some athletes need 2 days, some athletes need 3 days, some athletes might need 4 or 5 days in order to space these workouts out. And so certainly, like, depending on who you are and how much of a hit of work you're going to do at a time, you might need to space that stuff further out. And I think that, like, if we talk about an athlete that has unlimited time and an unlimitedly flexible schedule, that can be really beneficial, right? To like be really intentional about placing things further apart.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. But if we want to talk about somebody who is not training for a race, then I think for that person, it's not more further apart. It's like creating like a habitual program that is going to work for them, that, you know, they have a structure. And so I think it's more beneficial for somebody to just have a repeatable structure that they can build their life around, versus having something that's constantly changing where they're always trying to catch up or juggle or change this or whatever. I think it's better, like, I do this on these days, and then you make the program work within, like, this is the time I have on these days. Because really, for that athlete that actually needs to do this work further apart, it would probably be better to just do less work overall, right? For an athlete that's training for a big race, they have limited time and they like are, you know, super committed to it. I would rather massage a repeatable program for that athlete, that because they're generally like working and stuff like that, rather than have like something that has to be, you know, it like on a work day. The idea of like these like bouncing calendars, it works with retired people, but then they're also like maybe not as, I don't know, like I have some athletes that don't are like take sabbaticals from work or whatever, and are like pro athletes even though they're age groupers. And those athletes, I still give them that like structure, because the rest of their life is structured anyways, even if they're you know, retired. Like, this whole idea of a 10-day thing works really well with pro athletes. It doesn't work really well with people who have other commitments in their life, because generally, like, they want to do a master's program, or they want to do something, like they want to have some sort of like existing structure. So I'm not saying it's not possible, but that is like my argument with that, is that generally if it's more like, I think if I've ever lost an athlete, it's because I'll only give a week or so at a time, because I want to react to what's happening. And that's like the complaint I got was like, I just couldn't handle the fact I didn't know what was coming a month from now, you know? And so this whole idea of like, you don't even know what's happening next week on what day, that can be really stressful for athletes.
Yeah.
But if we rewind and we want to talk about blocks, absolutely. You know, you look at an athlete that's training really hard and they have a long weekend, and then you can organize the way that you have their training so that they can finish a block of training with like a big hit of volume, or like they build up to something. You actually use that day off so they can just sit on the couch for the day. Like, using blocks of time
Mhm.
to maximize the opportunity, for sure, that makes a ton of sense. And in my experience with especially age groupers that or like athletes that are pressed for time, if you can do a little bit more work in a shorter block, they all improve from that. So
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
extra doses in small, in like at more density tends to work really well.
And how about what is your experience or what are your thoughts on training around it? Should, in perimenopause, some people are still getting a regular cycle. And what are some of your thoughts on that and how to train with your cycle or and work in that kind of philosophy?
Yeah, so I think we studied a lot of this kind of stuff in the mentorship I did at Altus, and one of the PhD researchers that came in and did a presentation for us was Sophia Nymphis, and she was basically talking about this idea that like working around women's cycles in order to organize training. And so she brought a bunch of statistics and information and facts for us. And one of the things was that 10% of women have some sort of gynecological like abnormality that requires more medical intervention. So they have like a major issue with like fibroids or like super heavy bleeding and like stuff that just is so debilitating and horrible for them. So
Yeah.
it's like it's a medical issue
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
And so as a coach, it's important that you know that, because you can't train through that. Like it's ridiculous to even think that. And then there's 90% that are probably on a spectrum of capacity around their period. And so I think that for what my experience having all male coaches my entire life, like basically we just sucked it up and did it, right? So I think that for me, what I have learned as an athlete is that, the race is going to come anyways. And, you just have to be cognizant of the fact that potentially hormones are not going to be ideal because they're not going to move the race date. And there's athletes that have chosen to, take hormonal contraception to like deal with this and manage it. And I think all of that is sort of a discussion between you and your doctor and,
Mhm.
involving your coach as to whether you should manage that. But I think that issues around your cycle and your training are more, they're like how you're reacting to the training itself. If you're having days where, you're just not up for it, then, you adapt the session or you push through or you skip it. Basically, it doesn't matter if you're sick, if it's your cycle, if it's your anything. I think you just sort of take each day and your readiness to train and evaluate it. And then each individual person should continually be doing this based on their program. And then if you're doing this with your coach on a regular basis, probably there's going to be like a reliable pattern there that can be identified for you. But me as a coach, am I going to basically be like, okay, you need to tell me when your cycle is because I'm going to pull all your training back that week? No, I'm never going to do that, because every single person is their own person. And I never personally would have had to do it. And in 20 years of coaching, I've had some women who have said, man, like I got my period that day and my race was kind of crappy. It's probably related. I've had others that were like, I couldn't believe it, got my period, won the race, don't even know how that happened. So like if you're going to premeditate like what is going to happen based on research that, I think each person is unique here. And as much as I read studies, like I'm not a dinosaur, right? Like I have a science degree, like I read this stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that every study is limited to its design, right? And so how are they going to come up with a study that's going to be exactly what you need as a woman? They're not. They're not. Like and what was appropriate for me at 30 is not appropriate for me at 49, right? So I think that this is something that you and your coach figure out about you, because there's going to be uniqueness in every athlete. And I think that it would be a disservice for coaches to like basically, assume what is appropriate for somebody. based on research that I don't think is reflective of everybody, and needs to be, analyzed really closely for exactly all these reasons that I've just described, including like those that are medically, like,
Need support.
disadvantaged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Need medical, yeah, intervention.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we're hearing loud and clear throughout the series is the same message actually. And that, in the Fast Talk Labs interview, it was saying like, we're not fragile. We've got something going on. Like we can keep going. We're strong. And in another interview too with, Susan, she was just like, train, keep going, push through. Like sometimes that's hard, right? And I think that is, and even when we have different things, we can be aware and just come right back into our body. Okay, I have one more question for you. I could ask so many more, but I appreciate that some of your perspectives have been really wonderful, Mel. So thank you. Like really insightful and interesting and lots to ponder there. Was there a time, this is the final question, is there a time that you just knew like, I have all this experience as an athlete, I want to also be a coach? Or did you have any other, was it just always there that this is your calling as well, your other identity that you're taking on?
I think that the one thing that's been consistent throughout my career is just this like thirst for knowledge and just wanting to just keep learning as much as I could. And when I started working with athletes and just listening to them and hearing their stories and just like getting all these really interesting problems to solve, I just realized that, I got as much satisfaction about helping to solve a puzzle or shine a light into areas that like just show people their blind spots, right? It just was really like, I don't know, it's really satisfying for me to have that experience with people. It's funny because like a long time ago I thought, I wanted to help people, and like my original goal in university was to like go to med school. But then I decided to be a professional athlete. And like,
And there went that idea.
like barely made, like just got my university done and like went off. And so it was not a thing. But I just think that in as much as like, I'm not, curing cancer or doing anything like really, I don't have an essential service here. I think that it's like, it allows me to sort of connect to people and be part of their lives for X amount of time. And I just think that connection to people is a really, it's a valuable thing for me. And I just, and like, it just seemed like something that would give me good reason to keep learning and improving. And, it was something that I could see being even more satisfying than my own racing. And so that was just like kind of like a relief to discover that there was going to be a future that
Isn't
I was going
it
to really
something?
enjoy.
Like I can get so excited about my athletes, and I'm just like, man, like I remember just dragging my butt sometimes to races and not, I'm right there with them. It is a truly powerful thing. And I'm so glad that you are doing that and bringing such great perspective in numerous ways through different venues as well. So everybody keep following Mel, live a rad life. She's got lots of stuff going on. I encourage you to connect with her. Is there anything that you wanted to say that we may have missed that you wanted to pull out?
No, I really appreciate you pulling this together, Tennille. It's really great for you to, offer this for people, and, create an avenue for people to talk about this, because I think the one thing I would caution is that like I'm still racing at 49, but everybody's experience with like aging and menopause and whatever, like I just have a lot of empathy for those that struggle with it really early, and then just find that their energy is just zero and that the body that they're in is unrecognizable. And certainly I'm aware that this could happen to me any day. So like, it's like
Shifts,
results may vary with each person. And so I think that it's just good for everybody to hear a variety of perspectives on the issue, and like just, you know, find what resonates with them as an experience that they can relate to. Like potentially there's people that don't relate to anything I've said,
Yeah.
and that's valid, right? Because like I said, I think if there's anything that I've learned as a coach, is that you can't assume anything. Every single person is n equals one, and every program like has to be unique in order to match that individual. And you know, once you realize, like once you figure out who that person is, then you're doing a good job, right? But until you know, you don't know. So yeah. I just appreciate that you're like giving a wide swath of information.
Yes, I do. Yeah, well, I think it's important. And I think it's important to see the various ways that we can find community.
Yeah.
And I'm very passionate about people finding their community. I've got a community, you've got a community. There's so many other, you know, I'm interviewing coaches and health coaches and all sorts of people, because I want people to find a way to their movement and feeling strength and confidence and to keep going in it, because that at the end of the day is life, and that's inspirational, right? For all of us. So yay. All right. Well, thank you. And we'll catch up again soon, hopefully. Maybe here in Victoria.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And best of luck with the rest of the speakers. Thanks.